Is that okay if we steal a few minutes from the lunch to have a few questions? Is that okay with you? Could you come up, Zahava and where is Morris? Come. We'll take a couple of questions.
I'm troubled by the notion of repressed. Thank you. I'm troubled by the notion of repressed memory as you are. But towards the end of your lecture, you said, well, from the point of view of psychotherapy, repressed memory is a kind of a machinery to deal with the present. The problem is that when we go back to the legal arena, repressed memory is a machinery to deal with the past. So how do you reconcile between the two?
Between, again, what can you rephrase your two issues that
yes.
to reconcile?
Repressed memory, it's a question
repressed
to
memory, yeah.
and I'm willing, of course, to clarify. Repressed memory is a problematic notion. The specialists have some doubts whether it really exists. And Zahava tries to appease us. She says, well, repressed memory from the point of view of psychotherapy is a vehicle to deal with the present, not the past. But on the other hand, when we go back to the legal arena, repressed memory is a device to deal with the past. And it's a problematic device. So how do we reconcile between the doubts in psychotherapy and the need to establish conviction beyond any reasonable doubt in the legal arena?
I think that's a question for Zahava.
Yeah. Zahava.
Thank you. Thank you, Neil. It's a fantastic question. I mean, this is really the challenge. Clearly, from a psychological point, I'm not sure I was trying to appease, but I was trying to say that we're dealing with two different cultures. Clearly, therapists are interested in the well-being of the individual. And for the therapist, the only truth is the narrative that the individual tells himself or herself, and as it changes across, the therapy, if it brings some sort of a solution, or there is the haunting repetition compulsion, comes to some way to a closure, this is the goal of therapy. But clearly, in the so-called real world, in the legal arena, it's a huge challenge. Sometimes there be clues. I mean, obviously, I was hinting very briefly to the debate that, raged in Israel in 2014. There isn't a way that I know of, a clinical, sound way, to actually base allegation of one way or the other, based on recollection of either the abused or the traumatized or some people around him. But clearly memory cannot be trusted as such. But to go back to the story with which I started, I said it came as a total surprise to me. It did. But at the same time, since this is a very close friend of mine and I've known her all my life, I realized that there were clues that I could tell, by which I could tell that she was telling the truth. For instance, she comes, as I said, from this bourgeois family, but she had an open marriage. She had involved in promiscuous sexual activities during a military service, some of which had been experienced while she was dissociating. She was, taking a ride with somebody, and all of a sudden she found herself in this sexual intercourse, not having a clue. This is an extremely bright lady. So if you look at those clues, those are the indicators of a sexually abused individual. Clearly, but if you're asking whether this should be served as a proof in court, katonti. I really have no idea what served that, and unfortunately, my choice of profession was that of being alongside the patient, alongside the traumatized individual. But clearly, I don't think that there is any way that you could say beyond the shadow of a doubt that memories could be, because they could actually be interpreted one way or the other.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, I wonder whether anybody has attempted to map the brain biochemically and more so superimpose it on the firing of the neurons. In other words, superposition, specifically for fabricated memories or distorted memories.
Well, I mean, there's obviously, I'm sure Maurice can comment on this, but there's this whole aspect of neurochemistry we didn't really touch upon. There are neurotransmitter systems that are associated with this system which we have touched upon. The degree to which we can discriminate false memory to true memory based on neurochemistry, I'm not sure, yes, but I don't think the knowledge is here.
Because it's emotionally laden experience. And what you see, either by reporting, I mean, I'm venturing here, but either by self-report or any other so-called objective measure, reflects exactly the emotional state of the individual. And therefore, it's, I think, to the best of our knowledge, it's extremely difficult to use any other objective lie detector, so to speak, to be able to decide to distinguish between truths and non-truths in repressed and non-repressed memories.
So just to add, make things even more difficult. There are not biochemical experiments, but just functional neuroimaging experiments where people are asked to imagine something, not traumatic, just imagine what you're going to do tomorrow, or you're given, imagine yourself at a beach, not where you were, and so on. So far, our techniques, what we find is that the same structures that allow you to think about the past are implicated in thinking about the future and in imagining. We can't tell yet, or it's very difficult to tell. Even in cases where it's clearly fabricated, when we imagine the future, we use the same mechanisms that we do in remembering the past. And patients who have damage to the structures that Yitzhak and I talked about can't imagine the future any more than they can remember the past. So we're not there yet. I'm sure when we'll be refined, we might be there, but I doubt if we'll be able to tell the difference between a true and a false memory. Yeah. Somebody, I don't know how he is. I think he's monitoring this.
Thank you. It was really interesting. I'm a writer, and I recently actually wrote about my first kiss, so that was kind of interesting. And I noticed while writing that memories came up that I would never have been able to access otherwise. So I have two questions about this experience. One, if you've ever done any research about writing and memory. And two, is there any way for me to know if those memories are accurate or not?
Well, why don't you start and I'll
Well, there have been a series of studies by Penny Baker about writing diaries of traumatic events. And so I think you'd be well advised to read some of them. But turned out that as you write, a lot of things come to the forefront. And so a lot of so-called repressed or forgotten events get a life of their own. So you might be quite interested in that.
But whether they're true or not is another story. And I don't think memory, and maybe you'll correct me on this, because I'm not the kind of clinician you are. I don't think we're good at telling the truth or discovering what the truth is by what it is that people say. They could have a firm belief in something. A lot of this stuff on flashbulb memories, that's a half a mention. What makes them so exciting is that people seem to have an inordinate confidence in their memory when it's wrong. And we know it's wrong because we had interviewed them at the time that they acquired those memories. And it's that feeling that you really know it, and maybe it's because you use the same structures in fabricating memories and in remembering real ones. So it's good for literature. I'm sure you think it's... No, I mean, I think writers do this all the time. What writers do, as you must know, and I'm not saying anything profound, writers create experiences in us that seem very real because they activate the very same structures that we use when we're truly remembering. Anyway,
just one additional comment. I mean, I think in many of those cases, I suppose, the feeling comes first, or the emotion, and the interpretation or the feeling comes after that. And I have one very striking example which has nothing to do with memory or with trauma, but has to do with laughter. Okay, Even better?
Much better.
yes.
Okay, and this is the example. Okay, I once stimulated the patient in order to map her brain for language function. She had electrodes on the brain. She was seeing a picture of a horse. I stimulated, and she burst out laughing. This is all on video. Hysterical laughter. I could barely stop it. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, don't you see, this horse is very funny. Okay. Then we had her read a long paragraph about a rainbow. When we stimulated that point again, she burst laughing, very infectious and clear laugh. And I said, why are you laughing? And she said, don't you see this stupid rainbow? It's very funny. So finally, we just didn't know what to do. We just stood around and we looked at her and we activated the point. She started laughing. He said, why are you laughing? She says, you guys are so funny. So that's the interpretation. So I think in those cases, the anxiety, something can come and then the interpretation is filled in. And the ability to really interpret, to modify, to invent maybe, I think is unlimited really.
I wasn't sure if I got it right that you made some correlation between the inability to remember and the inability to imagine in the future. Yes?
I mean, both in people who are healthy, the extent to which they can imagine the past in detail is highly correlated with the extent to which they can imagine the future in detail. And in patients who have an inability to remember the past and imagine the future. Yes?
It doesn't have to do with rationalism or, imagination and rationalism.
Well, so here's the question. I mean, these are terrific questions, and they're really, for me, they're research questions. But I don't have a research answer. What we know, let me go just a little bit. The hippocampus I consider to be a stupid organism, or organ. It takes in anything that you're conscious of at the moment, that you're paying attention to. May not store it forever, but it certainly will take it in and hold it for a while. What it takes in isn't necessarily the outside world, it takes in what you imagine as well. Because that's what's, it acts on the neurons that feed it, or operates on the neurons that feed it. So, here's a structure that's putting things together, storing them, and then you need to get those things out. What other structure will you use when you're creating a detailed, imaginative event, if not some past memories that could enter into that? And that's what that structure is used for. It can't act alone. I talked about the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, but really it acts in concert. Woodstock had a picture of where lots of areas feed into it. They always have to go through a gate, but they come from lots of other places. So it can't act alone. And then acts of creativity, or acts of imagination that have to convey the imaginative event to the audience, you need the hippocampus. But if you only had the hippocampus, you wouldn't be able to do your work. You need frontal cortex, parietal cortex, to enable you to organize this material in a way that it will convey a narrative. The hippocampus doesn't have narratives. It has little bits and pieces. And the narratives come from, I think, this is just speculation, come from other parts of the brain. Now, Yitzchak may have another story, and you may have another story too.
Let's take one more question, and that's it. At the end there.
My question is from the physical aspect. Is the memory like of a picture of an actress? Is it stored, and you say it's stored in one neuron, or the one neuron is acting when you see it? Is it many synapses in this neuron, or is it connections to other areas? And there is a possibility maybe to check it using optogenetics, just to deactivate this neuron and to see if this actress is erased from memory.
Yeah, I think the idea that a single neuron is responsible for a single concept, and that's it, is sort of the concept of the grandmother neuron. And here, obviously, it's not the case, because we sample, let's say, 100 neurons, and we find that 1.5 neuron respond, or something in that order. So obviously, we're talking about groups of neurons, and they may be interconnected. So that by stimulating one, you may affect the other, but it's never really one neuron. I think what is surprising, these are relatively small groups, and we have made some calculations, some models came up with an upper limit sort of 1 million neuron per concept, but these were based on very crude assumptions, such as a number of concepts, right? Who knows the numbers of concepts? Yes. But this is sort of the order that I think this pans out.
I think that's it. Thank you very much.